Hey, everybody, we're live and really happy to have on my longtime friend, once Oakland City Attorney, the first Oakland Elected City Attorney in our history, John Russo, then great city manager for Alameda, Riverside, and Irvine, now consultant and wise man. I was about to say wise guy, John.
You say that, you wouldn't be the first.
I don't think there's anything wrong with being a wise guy.
Well, yeah, people say things like, wise guy, eh?
No, when I think of wise guy, I think of Goodfellas, right? I think of I think of a group of people that know each other for a long time, who know a thing, and that's a good thing, and that's a great thing. One thing we used to do a lot of that we don't do it as much for a lot of obvious reasons that I don't want to go into in length, because if you know both of us, they're obvious. We used to talk about the election online. We had the most famous one of our conversations, which I'm not going to pull up in the interest of time, but because it takes long to listen to, but I will just recite it, is when we first instituted ranked choice voting. And Don Parada ran for mayor and looked like, because he got 35% of the first choice votes, he was going to be mayor. And I remember you and I were talking on the video that's on Zenny62 on YouTube to this day. And you said the only way that Jean Quan could win is if she got 65% or more of the second place votes. And that ain't happening. And then, right. And then it did the very next day. And you called me, you said, Zenny, take that video down. It's completely wrong. I said, no, it's not. You're a genius. You hit it. And I look at that as the example of how surprising the outcome was to us, yet how prescient you were in pointing it out before it happened. Because that's really exactly what you did, Yeah. And having said all that, talking about craziness, if you look back then in 2010, and I said, hey, man, Donald Trump is going to be our president one day, what would you have said to me?
Yeah, and Bozo the Clown will be vice president. I mean, Melissa and I my wife and I talk about this all the time, that, when people would say, Donald Trump, whatever they're saying, good or bad. And every once in a while, one or the other will turn and just say, best sex I ever had, from the famous headline in the New York Post, where Marla Maples supposedly told a friend that when she had her affair with Donald Trump, it was the best sex she'd ever had. And then years later, it's revealed that the supposed insider that had heard this was actually Donald Trump himself calling the press. And it makes you wonder what guy needs, is so insecure that he needs to do that and to see that splayed in a headline, putting aside the lack of boundaries, etc. But be that as it may, and let me be clear. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is a hot mess, but he is a very appropriate representative of the default American character right now. Precisely for that reason, the lack of boundaries, the false bravado that tries to mask deep insecurity. So anyway, I want to say this, Zinni. A lot of times when you and I have spoken, I've been more in the role of advocate than analyst. I've given up on being an advocate. I'm now retired and I am purely an analyst. So I'm sure I will say some things here that will make a lot of my friends who, not all my friends by any stretch, but tend to lean left. If they see this, they will get annoyed at me. But it's not what I want or what I believe, but I think you have me here for analysis. So let's talk about
Yeah, I have you here for the same reason I have my friend Rick Gates, who, if you study politics, you know that he was the man who, he doesn't like that I say it this way, but it's true. He did turn on Trump. You know, he told what he thought was wrong, and he did what he had to do. Rick Gates is a good man. He told it like it was. So on that vein, I ask you this question, same as I asked him. How did Democrats lose?
Well,
my part. I'm a Democrat. You're a Democrat.
Well,
How did we lose? What do we do wrong?
Okay, so they didn't lose in terms of the expectations of how many Senate seats they would lose. They were defending a lot of Senate seats, and I think they did better than expected in terms of the number of seats that the Republicans control now in the Senate. Likewise, the Republicans have a smaller majority by by 2 seats than they did in the past. Is that right? Yeah, no, 1 seat. They have 1 fewer seat in this House than they had in the last House after the 2022 election. So did Democrats win? No. But Democrats were not routed in the Senate or in the House. I think the question you're asking me is, how did the Democrats lose this presidential election against a guy who is clearly deeply flawed, is an isolationist, is a white supremacist, and has been for years. That's not a pull it out of your backside, or it's demonstrable. How did the Democrats lose? And I think a lot of the fault, and this is where I'm going to get myself in trouble, but I think a lot of it is, notwithstanding all of the talk when Biden stepped down, that he was going to be remembered as a consequential president and a great president, and that he is not. He's going to be remembered as, history will eventually put him in a sort of B- level. He's not going to be seen as a terrible president, but it's hard not, in looking back at the administration, it's hard not to conclude that he was already not up to doing the job in the way he might have done it had he been elected president the first time he ran in 1988, or when he ran again in 2008. He's an old guy. He's the oldest, up till now, the oldest president we've ever had. And it shows. It showed at the end very clearly, but I think when you look retrospectively, you can connect some dots and see how his inability to serve as I believe he would have wanted to earlier in his life, that plus some speculation I'm going to make about the role of his staff, who'd been with him for a long, long time, and they finally got to the promised land of the White House, and I don't think they wanted to leave. So why did the Democrats lose? So the Democrats have become the party of. Did you see Hunger Games?
Yes, I did. Okay. Yeah, so which one I was going to say, because there's so many of them. But
well, I mean, any of them, really.
Multiplying. Really.
The Democrats, I remember watching Hunger Games, and I'd read the books before I went to the movies. And I remember thinking, because my sons were the age where they might have been reading it, so I figured, I should read it. I remember thinking at the time, whenever they would show the Capitol, and the folks in the Capitol who, appeared to be very elite and very removed from the lives of the people who lived in the various areas, the external to the Capitol areas, and who were primarily very concerned with talk shows and gossip and all of that. I remember thinking at the time, oh, that's the Democrats. That's how the Democrats are seen by the rest of the country. There's a reason why that rang a bell culturally. And so, to me, the Democrats have committed a couple of they made tactical errors, but the tactical errors, tactics are how you implement strategy, right? And strategy is how you choose to arrive at a location premised on a set of principles. The Democrats have missed the boat in terms of realistically of where the country is and how they contributed to getting the country there. They also, in this particular election, did not really pursue strategy. They just pursued a grouping of tactics, of tactical proposals designed to pick up this slice of the electorate or that slice of the electorate, and that's fine if you are cognizant of your meta sort of principles and how they reflect, because it's a democracy, at least right now it still is. We'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah. Look at South Korea. That's a scary one, huh?
Ooh. Who knew? Who knew? I always thought we would get here, but I thought it would be not in my lifetime. Too much reading of, every empire declines. I mean, everyone. Spanish Empire, British Empire, Roman Empire, Greek city-states, all of them. If you read history, you see it. We're not immune to it.
Great Power. Remember the Great Powers book?
Which one? The one by Kennedy?
No, the one by it came out in 1987. It was about the formula for America's decline. In fact, it actually spearheaded my thesis, which was a theory of declining American institutional world economy. But my point is that it was the beginning, for me personally, of the intellectual thought of how America might decline as a power and democracy. And
I mean, it's there. If you want to look at it, it's there. I always thought this would happen. You go back to your original question. What shocks me is I always thought the leader would be sort of a square-jawed, Midwestern military guy, clean as a whistle, never did anything wrong, truly religious, one wife, maybe his high school sweetheart, 2.5 kids, all of whom are, also serving the country in one way or another. And just someone who was like just a straight arrow, just, classic, what you would have seen. I would have never in a million years thought that Donald Trump, who is basically like a kind of bizarre, perverted Richie Rich, Nepo baby, that would be, and a New Yorker, and of all things, Queens. I mean, geez, if you're from New York, oh my God, Queens, really? Okay, but I'm just joking. It's but the idea that would be the guy, that would be really the most consequential political figure since, I think, people would say Reagan. I think he's the most consequential political figure at this point since FDR.
Yep.
And so when you look at it, I just never thought it could be someone like that. I would think there's no way folks in, the great flyover country would be following a rich, inherited Nepo baby New Yorker who stiffs everybody and chases porn stars and hangs out with guys like Jeffrey Epstein. Never thought that would be the guy. And the fact that that's the guy really demonstrates the sort of degeneration of the general public.
Do you think, I got to ask you though, react to this. My thought is that Donald Trump did the one thing that you and I both know in politics, particularly if you go back and watch the old firing line with how William F. Buckley and John Kenneth Galbraith would, talk. Clearly intellectual polar opposites, but also friends, right? But you never pushed the button of racism. You never used it as a tool. And if you did back then, you thought I was wacko. Now, the people who do it are not thought of as wacko. And that's the scariest difference for me in how things have changed and why Donald Trump won, because it was like, oh, it's okay to be that way, and I'm just going to let it all hang out. And now out here, they played these anti-trans commercials as much as 9 times during a broadcast in an hour.
Oh yeah, well they played them on the football games. They knew where they were targeting. Their tactics were very effective in terms of the micro grouping. Yeah. They did a great job. Susie Wiles and Crystal Mark, they did a great job. Here's the thing, though. To go back to the Dems, who again, they're the capital in the Hunger Games. The Dems have lost the thread of what the country is about. This country is not going to go down the line with a lot of the nonsense academic elite, poorly thought out, illogical,
pointy-headed.
Moralizing. Yeah, it is. It's well, yeah. I mean, but there's always been a strong anti-intellectual strain in the country. That didn't stop the Democrats from winning.
No.
Right? And dominating all through the mid-20th century. The issue here is the Democrats are, number one, they are finding way too much of their message in the fever dreams of leftist academics, nearly all white male, some white female, some African-American females and Latina males and females and African-American males, but mostly white dudes of privilege. And they are, as they always have, they are trying to mold working people and their views of working people through 2 different ideological streams. One is a leftover sort of socialist, internationalist play. And second is through a stream of moralizing against people who moralize.
Well said.
The trap is you may not be able to fight intolerance, which should be fought. Nothing I'm saying is that I support Trumpism or this nonsense, because it's unreality. But the Democrats also have a great deal of unreality. Let me give you an example. What do you think it feels like to, I'll pick a Latino dude, because that's a big discussion. How did the Democrats lose Latino men? How do you think it feels to a guy who is taking care of, has a small business, is taking care of people's lawns and plants? Another guy who's a plumber, another guy who's working construction, another guy who's working in a meatpacking plant, who's a second generation born in America or third generation born in the US, when the approach that the Democratic Party takes toward that guy tells him 2 things. Number one, we're going to start singing farm worker songs to you from 1969. So you ghettoize the guy when he's actually entrepreneurial and hardworking. Not that the farm workers weren't, but they weren't in a position to be entrepreneurial. So you don't address him like you would address a white American of middle class. You address him as if he were part of a stereotype that you created, because that's what captured your imagination when you were young, back in the 60s and 70s. What do you think his response is when every time he goes to a Democratic rally, it's a special rally for Latinos, and they start making you do the "Si se puede" chant? You don't feel like I feel when people make mob jokes at me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like that. It's like, don't mind me. I just went to university on an academic scholarship, but you're talking to me as if I'm, you get what I'm. It is condescending in the extreme, and the idea that you need to have a separate agenda. Actually, it's by definition it's benign, but it's racist.
Yeah.
And so now you've opened the door to, well, if they get, we get. And as you pointed out, Trump brings out all of these people who say, oh, it's okay to say these things. They've always been there. Trump's not the disease. Trump is the symptom. Trump is gathering up what was always there, and the door was opened to it. So what you've got with the Democrats is way too much strategic work that's been based on the concept that, yeah, you know what? Sooner or later, there's going to be more black and brown people than white people, and we're going to win every election. We really don't have to do much except to address that in that way. People don't want to be pigeonholed. People are people are people are people. They don't want to be treated poorly because of their race, and they don't want to be talked down to.
I want to add to that because me and friends I met, because we all had problems with the PPP loan program where, anyway, cut to the chase, we were forming a class action lawsuit against Bank of America. It ignited a bunch of us from San Diego, Las Vegas, Eastern Seaboard, whole 9 yards. And we had an easier time getting an ear with Republican lawmakers in Congress. Amy Yassinger was our leader, and she would go to Washington. But with people who are our party, it's like they didn't care about it. And the problem was that, frankly speaking, when Donald Trump developed the program, because it came in the Trump administration, they had no problem getting the money out fast. But the minute it became our turn, all of a sudden it's fraud. And I got a letter from a SBA attorney accusing my company of not being real. And I called Jim Atchison and I said, what's going on here? And I said, well, they think that your company isn't real because you own a .com and a .net. I said, yeah, I want to own those names. He said, Zinni, I know it's stupid. I said, get rid of this, please. He did. Okay. And point that I'm making is that our party has, first of all, no interest in helping small business people in the internet age. All right. That should be the focus. Because meanwhile, that they're talking about all this stuff that's really 20th century. Here I am, server that's a dedicated server. I'm working with people in India and the Philippines who have cultural differences, which Smith come to an understanding. But 3 years ago, they were American in Houston, and John with HostGator said, Zinni, get used to this, or because next year you're not going to have it. People who are smart, who are American, who talked, who understood what I was trying to get at, who helped me like that, would send me the code to use myself, all that. I'm only now just developing that after 3 years, okay? But the trouble is the money is going outside the country. And it's a giant leak that's happening. We're paying no attention to it. I try to tell the party it goes through one ear and out the other. And I'm thinking, what are we doing?
Well, Zinni, look, the issue here is everybody in the Democratic Party way of looking at things, everybody has to fit into a box.
Yeah.
Whatever box you want to call it. Some of those boxes are racial. Some of those boxes are ironically gender. And some of those boxes have to do with the difference between officially approved working people, which means public sector employees, and I'm going to come back to that, or some sort of romanticized version of what a blue-collar part of America should look like, which is out of date. And they just haven't stayed up. And part of that, it's hard not to consider that part of that is the leadership of the Democratic Party they're old boomers. I mean, look, I think Nancy Pelosi was a fabulous speaker. I think best speaker since Rayburn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think history will show that. I think she was a terrific legislator. But how old is she? How old, Feinstein, how old did she have to be before she never left.
Right. No, she didn't.
You know,
right.
How old, it's no accident that you had Biden, but Trump is now the oldest candidate for president ever. This is the boomers never letting go. The difference is the Republicans have actually gone out of their way to promote younger leadership.
Right.
The Democrats,
right.
It's only been in the last 2 years that the Democrats have begun to really do that and look at moving on. And so they're behind by a decade, in my estimation.
Mm-hmm.
But let me get back to how did the Democrats get here? Number one, too much influence from really boundary-pushing academics who I think are out of their minds. Second, too much of this putting people in boxes, some romanticized and some that are pretty ugly boxes that they've put people in. Third is the role of public sector labor. So let's take an example here. During the pandemic, and I was a city manager at the time that the pandemic started, it absolutely made sense to close down the public schools. Why? We didn't have any therapeutics. We didn't really know what we were looking at. It looked pretty bad. People were dying. And we didn't have vaccinations. We didn't know that if kids got sick, they may not get too damaged by it, although we weren't sure. But we knew that older people, and that's a large part of our demographic because of the baby boom, that older folks were in a lot of danger, right? And people who have respiratory problems, but older folks. So the concern was, little Johnny might be okay if he gets COVID, but he might bring it home and kill grandma.
Right.
Totally legit concern. And so you close the schools. But the second year after we had vaccines and we had therapeutics, there was no reason to keep the schools closed.
Yeah.
And what happened? You ticked off million is nothing, zillions of working parents. Because now what are they going to do with their kids all day? How are they going to work? There's tremendous amount of studies done now that shows that American kids really were damaged in their academic progress as a result of that second year compared to what was done in other countries where once the therapeutics and the vaccinations were available, they reopened the schools. So what was the possible reason not to reopen the schools? Well, I'll tell you what it was. It was the power of teachers' unions who were concerned, I understand, concerned that kids are going to get their members sick.
Mm-hmm.
I get it.
Right.
But not everybody has a veto over everything. And those are public employees. And, the writer Joe Klein, who's, originally, kind of a Democrat gone independent.
Right.
He said, look, the problem with public sector unions is with private sector unions, that the workers are organized against the role of capital and the greed of capital. What are public sector unions organized against?
Right.
The public?
Hey, let me throw this at you in that way.
Let me finish the point. If I
wasn't going to disagree. I just wanted.
No. I just want to finish the point. I'm not saying that the Democrats should not be partnered with public sector labor. I had great relations with pretty much all of the public sector labor unions, particularly firefighters, who I have a great deal of regard for. And in nearly every city I was in, except Oakland, great relations with the police. But it's one thing to be allied and view labor, public sector labor, as a stakeholder in the party. It's another for the party to become the political tool and wing of public sector labor. And the Democrats crossed that line. And so some of the mistakes that have been made strategically, not tactically, but strategically, begin and end with the inability to do anything that will offend public sector labor. And that's a big, big boundary, that a big electric fence, if you will, that really, really harms the Democrats' ability to fashion solutions for the public at large, because public sector labor is not the public at large.
And I want to use this as not a jumping off point, but a sort of a transformational point to talk about California and Oakland, because here I am in suburban Atlanta, still with ties in Oakland for a host of reasons. But the bottom line is I'm on the outside with a different point of view. And what I've seen is Oakland being hammered as being the linchpin example of democratic failure. And I want to know what you thought about the chain of events that led us to this recall that we just faced, because a lot of what you're saying really causes one to really turn back and say, well, Oakland, and then here is the man who was the once Oakland City Councilmember, once great city attorney for Oakland. Still, I follow where you're going, coming up for fundraisers and everything else. So you're not, out of Oakland, neither am I. How does all of what you're saying, how did it come to bear on Oakland, in your opinion? Because, and I'll just start off with this comment. I felt that Shanghai was using Trump tactics, and that's what caused her to lose the electorate, dividing the electorate.
I mean, I think people make a mistake when they try to analyze American politics purely on the basis of ideology or platforms. I think to understand politics in a mass communication environment that is become atomized and divided, the commonalities we have to look at are the narratives we have all adopted. And those narratives actually operate the same on the left as they do on the right, the same with the Republicans as they do with the Democrats. The Republicans did not invent conspiracy theories. The Democrats have plenty, and I've seen plenty over the years. Think back not that long ago, the idea that the second Bush administration created 9/11 and did 9/11. Whether you want to talk about people saying that the CIA intentionally brought crack into African-American communities. That happened in part because of the work of the CIA in trying to support the Contras and the kind of supply chains that were created in order to get the arms back down illegally.
As point on Gary Webb's book, The Dark Alliance.
Yeah, but it was basically, well, we don't care if the African-American communities in our cities are collateral damage. If they could have achieved the same goal in a different way that was more effective, they would have gone a different way. But it became an article of faith, at least in Oakland, that the CIA was trying to destroy the Black community. That was their goal. It's not. But that's kind of a cousin to, when you talk to, Italians, and they'll tell you, we built this country. And you talk to Polish, and they say, we built this country. And everybody, we built this country.
Yeah, Chinese Americans, we built the country, right?
Yeah, the only thing I will say well, African Americans absolutely built a lot of the wealth in this country, and their labor was stolen for obvious reasons, to do with slavery. That's a legit point. But I think, to go back to your original question, I do want to point out that I do believe that Kamala Harris ran an almost flawless campaign given the cards she was dealt. And let me make this point historically. In 188 years, we have only had one sitting vice president win the presidency through election. We've had vice presidents become president because, John Kennedy's head got blown off in Dealey Plaza. Yep. William McKinley was killed at the at the World's Fair, the Exposition. Yep. Garfield was killed by a disgruntled office seeker, and Lincoln was basically one of the last casualties of the Civil War. He was killed by a Confederate, white
John Wilkes Booth,
this maniac. Yeah. But otherwise, when someone dies, Warren Harding dies in office, Cal Coolidge becomes president, Roosevelt dies in office, Truman becomes president, and then they win the following election. But a sitting vice president once in 188 years, and many tried. Richard Nixon lost trying to succeed Dwight Eisenhower. Hubert Humphrey, Lyndon Johnson, Al Gore, Bill Clinton. Why do you think that there's only one, and that was Bush Sr. And Bush Sr. won that election because he ran against a candidate who was a good man, but probably was at the head of the single worst presidential campaign that I ever saw in my lifetime.
Walter Mondale, you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about Dukakis.
Oh, Mike Dukakis. Oh, yeah.
Dukakis, 88.
Right. With the cap in the tank and everything. Right.
Yeah. You got to go back to Martin Van Buren in 1836 to get a vice president a sitting vice president who succeeded their president through election. So there's a reason for that. She being Kamala, she was swimming upstream against two really strong traditional rivers. One has to do with race and obviously with misogyny.
Right.
But the other was vice presidents don't win. And the reason for that is, and you saw it in this campaign, vice presidents don't win because vice presidents have to make a choice of either accepting everything about the administration in which they served. And we all know, what did Cactus Jack Garner say? He was FDR's first vice president. The vice presidency isn't worth a bucket of spit. He actually said something else, but it's transmitted in the books as bucket of spit. We all know vice presidents over the years have been given roles, but they don't control the administration. They have a word to say. They are, first among peers, but they don't run the administration.
So are you saying that it was a mistake to push Joe Biden out?
No, not at all. I think it was a mistake for Joe Biden not to step down, or not to keep his promise that he saw himself as a transitional president and was not going to run for a second term. And I don't think he and his circle of advisors ever meant that. I don't think they ever for a minute meant not to pursue a second term. And part of that is, I think, why Kamala was kept under wraps for the first 2 years of the administration until the Dobbs decision happened and we were in the election season for 2022. Then they said, go handle the women folk. But because Biden is uncomfortable and has always been uncomfortable talking about abortion because he's a practicing Catholic. He's a real Catholic.
Yeah.
Right. So let me get back though. What I'm trying to say about vice presidents is if you remain loyal to the administration you were in, you get all their baggage. If you aren't and you try to separate yourself, it's even worse because then you come across as a scheming, non-trustable politician who would stab in the back the person who gave you the opportunity to be in the position you're in right now, who elevated you to the vice presidency. That's why they never win. They can't, it's almost impossible unless the other side completely falls down, like the Dukakis campaign did. It's impossible to negotiate that tightrope. And I think she did as well as she could have done.
But that's why I'm asking you about Biden being pushed out or jumped out. Van Jones wanted him out, okay, as an example. I mean, I know that personally. I know that from a CNN, and we've had arguments about it.
Yeah.
I disagreed with it. But what you're saying is we were damned if we had him, Biden, and we're damned if we didn't, Harris. Am I right?
Well, okay, but if Biden had been at the top of the ticket, you wouldn't be looking at a 215 to 210 House right now. You'd be looking at a 230, 232 or so House. If Biden had been at the top of the ticket, you wouldn't have 53 Republican senators. You might have 56. So I think that's a huge issue.
I don't agree with Elvin's statement, but I'm
no, I don't either.
Yeah,
I don't either.
We disagree. Yeah, we disagree.
I don't think you win elections. It's not a question of moving to the center, because trying to piece together a coalition based on these micro principles, or trying to put a camp or another element, trying to put it together by, to use the word catering. Oh, we're going to do something special for you because you are an African American, or you are a Latino, or you are an Italian, or, pick the group, right?
No, right.
The idea that you win an election doing that is you address people.
Right. And if I may, John, Elvin, you came in late, because we actually really did address that. And I'll say, as a black guy, what we were talking about was the PPP loan situation. The Democrats didn't address us going through the same kitchen table problems. Okay. Right, John? That's all I'm saying. It wasn't.
Well, let me ask you this. If I'm an African American working class guy who's busting his tail to put food on the table, and I went to a decent high school and did well, but I had to work in the summer to help the family or the household I was in. So I couldn't afford to go be an intern somewhere for free, because I didn't come from that upper middle class kind of family. So I couldn't go to the college I wanted to go to. And maybe I went to community college and focused on something that allowed me to own a small business. I'm now a plumber. I'm now an electrician. I'm now a landscape guy. What do you think I'm feeling when I see a bunch of privileged kids getting their loans forgiven?
Forgiven, right. Absolutely.
And I'm paying the taxes for that. How do you think, how does that attract African? I mean, if that was your way of putting a coalition together, and you really knew and were listening not to what academics of any race are saying, but you're listening to the people who used to be the heart of your party, which is the people who work with their hands, people like my dad, who was a lifelong Democrat. If you, and a union guy, if you're listening to that guy, he's going to say, how the hell is it that some kid who took culture studies or, took something that now they're complaining they can't find a job that they can make enough money to pay the loans they took out, or their mom and dad didn't want to go into the family wealth pot to pay for it. Why am I paying for it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's right, although
Right.
I actually don't like loan forgiveness without some public service attached to it. But be that as it may, that's not my point. My point is the traditional base of the Democratic Party was abandoned by the policies that were being put forward and the policies that Biden did succeed with, which will be viewed and why he'll be a B-level president in history, to do with infrastructure that has absolutely been neglected. Everyone's talked about
absolutely.
it. Talked about it.
And John,
talked about it. None of them did.
I want to add something to what you're saying too, but it's a component that has to be added. People forget that ever since George Floyd was killed, commercial after commercial presents America as it is, interracial, heavily interracial. Black guys, white woman, a Chinese man with a white woman. Okay, it's wonderfully mixed up. And yet we have this tendency to present America as if that's not the case, which is infuriating to a lot of people, Mr. Elvin Brown, okay? That's not the way you point out. America really isn't America, and that's why a lot of people have shifted from the Democratic Party because, again, it's kitchen table issues. We were suing Bank of America on the PPP loan matter of forming to do so. Bank of America adjusted. We were all different types of people, okay? But if you look at who the people were married to, they were all different types too. You can't go by that anymore. It doesn't fit. People get pissed off with it. They say, hey, you're not talking to me. So I'm not going to listen to you. So I'm going over here. I'm going to be an independent. There's a lot of that going around. And people just want you to deal with lowering housing costs and lowering the situation. We're out here, you get hammered with weather, and yet the insurance companies jack the rates up on you. And they turn around and say, you filed too many claims. Well, look at the weather. And the government sits back and does absolutely nothing. And people get pissed off about it. And they get tired. They just they just want their money situations taken care of. They don't care about this race stuff anymore.
You mentioned inflation. If someone has a heart attack, it isn't the steak they ate last night. It's all the steaks they ate 20 years ago, 30 years ago, etc.
Yep.
This idea that there's an inflation, not inflation button sitting on the desk in the Oval Office is just ignorant. And one of the failures of the Biden administration, and again, remember I said at the beginning, you look back and say, maybe he wasn't all that early, even early in his term, and they were just protecting him. He needed to go out or send Kamala out. He needed to go out and explain the inflation you're seeing really is Donald Trump's fault.
Yep.
He gave a tax break, and he gave tax breaks to lower income working people. It was not, there was some tax benefit. It was crumbs compared to what super rich people got. And people at my level got hammered in that. The brackets actually went the wrong way for someone like me. But you took an economy that was already gaining steam, and it was and you supercharged it by putting the tax breaks in. Then you didn't make any cuts to anything, and as a result, you blew a further hole in the national debt, $8 trillion in 4 years. So you were already in the hole. And then when the pandemic comes around, when you would have needed money to spend, you didn't have it, so you borrowed more. So you took an economy that was strong, that had recovered largely, under very strong economic management in the second term by Obama.
Yep.
You then supercharged it. You pressured the Fed not to raise interest rates until it was too late, right? Remember, he was pressuring the Feds.
It was.
Anytime the Feds were considering, so they were about 6 quarters too late at starting to raise the rates because they couldn't do it under Trump the way they should have, or they perceived they couldn't do it under Trump. All of that happens. What do you think the outcome is going to be worldwide? And you say, well, then what about the rest of the world? Well, that's because the dollar is king. So if you're printing more dollars and you also haven't properly handled the issue of supply chain disruption, of course there's going to be a problem. Now, Biden and the Biden administration made it worse, but I don't think they made it that much worse than what was going to happen and was happening when he took office anyway. And so the big thing, if you talk to, say, my sons, and you know them, Zinni, but they're 26 now, they're young men, they're looking at, how am I ever going to buy a house? How am I going to, and they're fortunate because they come from a family that's pretty secure. The main thing they talk about, they don't believe any of the stuff about the border. They look at it and they say, you know, who the hell's going to work in the restaurants? Who's going to work in the construction? If we need folks, we need folks. But when they look at inflation, they're like, why would I, Dad, you think this is what, Dad, you think Biden's a good president? I said, yeah, on balance, I think he's been okay. And they're like, he's terrible. Have you seen like how expensive debt? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And of course, that's the most important thing to people.
Yeah, that's
the running joke. The running joke in this house was, the running joke in this house was, I'm going to vote. Yeah, screw democracy. Have you seen the price of eggs? I'm voting for Trump.
Yeah.
As if Trump will fix it, because you know this because you understand economics, and the average person really doesn't.
No.
If he were serious about the tariffs and about cutting off the labor supply, you're going to see, to use his quote, you're going to see inflation, the likes of which you've never seen.
And yet he's done nothing to get rid of it. Sir Chai says, hopefully Oakland gets its act together. No more activists and pleasing the needs of former San Franciscans. Thoughts?
Me?
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is I don't think that's wrong. I don't know about former San Franciscans because that happened after I left. But
he's talking about people who moved over to Oakland from San Francisco.
No. I'm aware
and I
of
pointed
that.
out
that the heart of that and its influence in Oakland is something I don't particularly understand because I've been gone from Oakland nearly 10 years now.
That's true.
But the issue of activists having a really disproportionate influence over what the government does. Yeah. I mean, again, if you're trying to govern by making the loudest people happy, you can't make everybody happy, and it's not how you should govern.
Yeah.
You campaign based on how you put a coalition together. You don't govern necessarily based on that. But in Oakland, Zinni, you know the phrase that I heard starting 25 years ago in Oakland, which is the nonprofit industrial complex.
Right.
Which is really just another version of Tammany Hall.
So I got to ask you, in that context, does that all explain the rise of Seneca Scott, who was able to marshal people together and recall?
I'm not crazy about the tone, that Seneca. I mean, because I'm watching it on video and stuff.
Right. You see, you're going with what you see.
He's obviously talented. He's got a lot of energy, and he's not wrong. People, I'm hearing from people in Oakland who are still there. When you think about it, think about how many of our group
have
that
left.
was deeply involved in Oakland and cared, and blood on the floor.
Yeah,
cared about Oakland and made sacrifices. How many of those folks are gone?
yeah. Steve Lowe, Petaluma. Yeah,
yeah, lots. Well,
one example.
One example. Well, think about think about someone like a Phil Tagami.
Yeah, they chased Phil out of Oakland. Yeah,
me gone.
Yeah, yeah. They chased you out of Oakland. Yeah,
yeah. Well, they didn't chase me out of Oakland. I just decided I'd had enough, and also my family's main, like most families that have anything, my main investment was the house I owned in the Oakland Hills, and I knew enough about Oakland's situation to not believe that was a very good investment for us. And I was right. I was absolutely right. We sold that house at a price that it pretty much, if we'd held on to it, we would have made less than 2% appreciation a year.
Wow.
Whereas by moving the way we did and handling things the way we did, we're very comfortable now.
Yeah. Elvin, hey, Elvin, thanks for the contributions. He says, I lived here in Oakland since 1969, and gentrification from Mayor Jerry Brown that led to its decline with more people living homeless. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of disagreements with Jerry Brown, but the theory that I just don't agree with this. It would take a long time. We don't have the time, but it'd take a long time for me to go through why I just don't agree with this.
I think I don't know what he's responding to, but I heard Jerry say in 2020 he was criticizing the use of a tax increment financing for affordable housing, saying I didn't want subsidized housing in my elegant downtown. He said that on a special that was produced by KQED in 2020. I went ballistic.
Well,
so this is why you got rid of redevelopment?
He had no problem with subsidizing a particular developer that was helpful to him in future campaigns. So, he used the funny thing with Jerry, right? The funny thing with Jerry with redevelopment is all of the things he complained about with redevelopment were things he did very well.
Yeah.
And I helped him do some of them.
But so did I. I had to develop a symposium for the 10K project. Remember that?
I mean, but he, Jerry is a great example. I think on balance, he was a pretty good mayor. Even though we fought a lot. And I regret some of that just on a personal level. But
why? Why do you regret that? No, I got to ask you why. Because you did the right thing. I mean, you did the right thing, Johnson. What do you regret?
This is not just to do with Jerry. We'll talk about it offline. I have a lot of regrets about how I handled my personal relationships with the people with whom I was working at Oakland City Hall. I could have been kinder. I could have been less judgmental. I could have been less defensive. Just a lot of things that I think putting aside whether it would have made it easier for me to do some of the good things that I felt I was doing. I just think there's something to be said for, let me put it this way. You never convince somebody of something by telling them they're stupid and that they're wrong.
Right.
You have to meet people where they are. And that's a lot of like what I've been talking about today with you about the Democrats. You have to meet people where they are. You don't meet people, you don't change minds when you open up with "you're an idiot."
But I have to say a little bit of pushback. You were not like that a lot, okay? And a lot of people to this day love you for that. People who love working for you, working with you, and look, we were all opinionated. We were all driven by the fact that we were all concerned about the condition of the city, like so many people, and that drives a certain anger, which sometimes we fairly or unfairly directed each other. that's there's nothing wrong with that as long as we realize that and put it in its box.
Yeah,
I think
no. I'm not. Look, I'm not staying up nights going, "Gosh, I wish I could do it all again."
Good.
That's not what I'm saying. But
Okay.
it may be a function of age, maybe a function of less testosterone than I had when I was in my 30s, which is natural. Maybe a function of raising.
Does that mean I still have mine?
Right. And maybe a function of raising a couple of kids and watching them go through some of the same emotional turmoil that's unnecessary over things where I have to say to them, "You're okay. It's fine. You're doing great. It's okay." I don't know. I mean, I do think about it sometimes, and then other times I'm very proud of some of the things that I was able to do, and I am proud of the fact that I can honestly say that I never made a call or a decision other than what I thought was best in the long term for Oakland when I was there. I didn't always make the right. I'm not saying I was always right. Obviously not. But what I am saying is at the moment I was making the decision, I truly believed both in my brain and in my heart that I was making the right decision regardless of the politics of it or what it meant for me necessarily.
Right.
But I was wrong.
But if you're referring to, like, for example, I don't think Oakland Mayor Gene Kwan at the time treated you fairly at all. Okay.
No. She didn't.
So I think you were reacting. Part of the way you're reacting and being treated unfairly.
Well, no, I actually, yeah. I mean, it probably wasn't the best idea after spending all those years in Oakland on the way out the door to say when I was asked, "So what do why are you leaving?" I said, I'm no longer interested in representing a morally bankrupt organization. I don't think.
But you weren't wrong.
But I don't think I needed to say that. I don't think it helped anything.
Yeah.
It didn't change anything. It was a broad stroke brush, and it included a lot of people, some of whom deserved better from me. Who cared for me and were friendly to me and trying to doing what they thought was best. Gene, I don't have anything to say about Gene. Gene,
yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's just like, we're all people of very strong opinions. And frankly speaking, I don't think you can do the jobs that we've done well. I believe I represent LEQ extremely well. In fact, too well when I was representing him on council. But that's what you're supposed to do, and with that, you're going to have some friction. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. I believe that's a perfect storm. That's fine.
Yeah. So we got to wrap up because I'm late for something I was supposed to do 15 minutes ago. 14.
Well, let me get you out of here the right way. Hey, folks, I want to thank my longtime friend, John Russo, and I want to invite him back and to talk more about politics and really also the state of California, because I really think that needs outside of Oakland a focus that we both can talk about in the future of our friends like Gavin Newsom and others. And there's a lot going on with the fifth largest economy in the world. So I'm going to take. I'm not going to take John out, but I'm going to end this the right way and say, John, stick around in the background. I got this. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for your comments. They're very valuable. And please like and subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark OaklandNewsOnline.com and check out ZennyReport.com. We have 100 websites in the Zenny62 Media Incorporated system. That ends this stream. Thanks, John. Stick around. Don't move a muscle.